Okay. Hello, hello. All right, I think we're happening there. Okay, yes. Hi, Christy. Christy's the first one to post something. So, people starting to roll in. Good to see you all. Happy Sunday to you, wherever in the world you may be, unless you're on the other side of the international date line, in which case, happy Monday to you, I guess. I'm always slightly dicey on where that change is, and what exactly it is. But then again, there's lots of these kinds of things that I'm slightly dicey about. Like really, how do bicycles work? I mean, I'm easily confused. Anyway, let us settle in here, and good to see you all. And I will tell you. Let me just adjust the. No, I want a little more blue in there. That's better. So, as I said last night or early this morning, depending on how you parse these things, my last week and Deb's last week also has been almost entirely taken up with doggage, and dogging. That is pretty much how it works. We are still trying to integrate two dogs, new dog, old dog, new dog, Lemon, and old dog, Johnny. And Johnny in particular is still very nervous about the idea of another dog simply showing up, not grasping. And even though we took him along for the adoption, he still hasn't quite grasped that this is something that we did on purpose, and that she didn't just shove her way in and start lying on his beanbag and things like that. So they're doing better, obviously, after 2 weeks. I hope so. After 2 weeks of Deb and I largely having to stay isolated from each other so that each one of us can give aid and comfort to a dog. But that has really been, because of the fact that they're still nervous about each other, and they've had a couple of fights where they were doing fine and everything seemed okay, and then one of them made a sudden movement and the other one freaked. Usually Johnny is the one freaking because he's a very nervous dog and always has been. But they are getting better, and we can take them out for walks. That works fine as long as Johnny gets to lead. That's very important to his self-image. So as long as Johnny can be the lead dog, he's okay, and perfectly happy to do it. So we're hoping to move on to various other strategies, ameliorating strategies to enable them to get used to each other, and because ironically enough, the reason that we needed to get a second dog is because Johnny has always had companions, and it's only with the passing of our dear departed Walter that Johnny was the solo dog. And so we have never been able to, we've never gone out, let alone go out of town for a couple of weeks without Johnny having a companion. Not that we would leave him on his own, or even two dogs on their own. We've always had somebody staying with them, usually one of our kids. But, so even if, when it's just Deb and I and we want to go out for the evening and go have dinner or something, God forbid, we should do anything that crazy. We're been a bit worried that Johnny is not used to being alone on his own. And if anything loud happens, he's liable to chew off the closet doors or something, as he did when we left him on his own with other dogs, but on his own one 4th of July. So we learned that lesson, and we still have the tooth marks on our sliding closet doors to show us and remind us why that was a bad idea. And we're supposed to be going out of town at least a couple of times in this next year. We've got plans for, including in probably May this spring. So as a result, we were very concerned about, Johnny's never been a solo dog, and if we go out of town, he will pine and blah blah blah, and maybe destroy things if we leave him alone, even just for an evening. So that's why the rush to judgment in terms of getting a second dog. Not that I think any of you are interested in this, but I've kind of developed a tradition of talking about what's been going on, and that's really all that's been going on. I have found a few moments to work here and there, at which point I scuttle downstairs and try and get whatever's in my head out onto the screen. But it's really been tough the last couple of weeks. But we are hoping, we are praying, we are doing whatever we can do with the idea that this will improve things in the long run. I would have rather gotten another old dog personally, because, when you get a 1-year-old dog, you're letting yourself in for, many, many, many years more of responsibility. But we found a dog that we fell in love with, and she's definitely a sweetie. So that's where we're at. So I have gotten a little work done on the splintered sun and a few other things that needed to be dealt with around the house, but that's about all I can do right at the moment. So I hope by the time that I'm back here reading to you next week, I can say, oh, good, everything has moved forward and, life is moving back to normal again. And so we'll keep fingers crossed, and there, both hands, keep fingers crossed, and we'll wait and see what happens. But anyway, so that's what's going on here. Anything else? No, except that we were able to go to the park today because it stopped raining. So that's good. And we're supposed to have a couple of more clear days. So that will give us a chance to continue getting the dogs exercised and us, which is also useful, especially after as much rain and weather misery as we've had. Let me think. Is there anything else? No, I mentioned last night, I'm really getting tired of living in this god-awful hellhole of a catacomb, for lack of a better term. So nothing against the cats. They're lovely cats. But, since they're down here all day, and this is where they live, they have just shredded everything. The whole downstairs, which was a mess anyway. My office it's not an office. It's just a repository for cat toys and ripped up cat boxes and all the things that cats like to sit in and on. So, animals. Okay, enough about animals. Working on Splintered Sun. That's about it in terms of useful information to pass along. Let me go and check in and see who has said hello so far. And I see, yes, Christy was the first. And I said hello. I'll say it again. Hello, Christy. And there's Emily. Hello, Emily. Good to see you. Medardo. Hola, senor. Good to see you too. Mark Marino. Hello, Mark. Welcome aboard. Tracy. Hello. Good to see you. It was great just to get out of the house, get the dogs, get out of the house, go up to the park or down to the park or over to the park and walk them around in the sunshine. That was lovely. And for a moment, I was reminded that spring will come, which is always an important thing to be reminded of. So, yes, it was a good day. And who else here have I not said hello to? Barb Ann. Hello, Barb. Good to see you. Susan Shamblin. Nice to have you. Ray Weatherford. Hello. Greetings to you. Angie booted herself out again. I assume that means out of the reading, but maybe it means something else. I don't know. I Count Crows JS. Hello, Tad and friends, it says. Well, hello to you. Welcome. Nice to have you. Who else? Let's see. Kristen. Hi, Kristen Rule. Hi, Kristen. Good to see you as always. Claudia. Hello. Hey, all, waiting to, please keep me in your thoughts, Claudia says. She is waiting to hear if she still has her federal government job. Well, obviously, yes, absolutely. Good luck with that, and it's too bad I can't talk about politics because I'd have a lot to say, but I made that decision a while ago that this would just be a reading show. But anyway, so yes, absolutely, fingers crossed, and I know what a scary time that can be. So wishing you the best and hoping for the best. Jeremy. And Jeremy went to library book sales, found audiobooks of 3 volumes of Shadow March. Haha. Cool. Sherry, hello. Good to see you, Sherry. As always, it's a pleasure. Let me see. Who else is here that I haven't said hello to yet? It's same. Oh, I Count Crows JS. I changed my name. Same old James. Okay, so hi, James. Good to see you. And who else have we got? Lalani Holmes. Hello, Lalani. Pleasure to have you with us. Mads Magsano. Hello, Mads. Nice to have you with us, too. Sir always scares me because it either means I'm going to have to go off and fight a dragon, or it means that I am having to serve some kind of bureaucratic purpose. But I'll take it. But Tad is a lot easier. Let me see. Anybody else? Isaac. There's Isaac. Hello, Isaac. Good to see you. Isaac checking in. So, what I have got tonight, of course, is more of Bobby Dollar, which is what I am going to be reading. And we are introducing one of my preferred characters, or not preferred in the sense that I have any, one more than the other. But I always liked Fatback, and that's one of the reasons, by the way. Some of you who have been with me for a long time, ever since I started this reading process back in 2020, I guess it was, may remember that I actually read my Bobby Dollar Christmas story, probably somewhere around Christmas. So those readers or listeners, auditors, those folks have already met Fatback, whether they, of course, they may have read the books, but that's what we're doing tonight, and that's the name of the name of the chapter is Pigman. So it, of course, reminds me of the Pink Floyd song, but then again, just thinking about animals in general reminds me of the Pink Floyd album. So what I am going to do is I am actually going to start reading, and we'll probably get through at least a couple chapters and maybe 3 tonight. So anyway, Bobby, I won't be able to give you guys a synopsis every time of what's been happening because it's deliberately meant, as a noir type thing with a kind of a touch of Cold War spy story included. It has a very labyrinthine plot with lots of things happening and lots of clues being dropped and lots of questions that the protagonist has about why this happened or why this didn't happen. So I won't be able to bring it all forward each time. That's just silly and crazy and too much. But I will tell you that Bobby needs more information specifically about the fixer who was sent in, the attractive demon woman who was sent in. He wants more information about her and about Edward Lyons Walker, who's the man who died, killed himself, but his soul was not around when everybody showed up to judge him. And so Bobby has gone up into the hills above San Judas and to an isolated pig farm, and that's where we are. So I am going to start with this chapter, with this page where I left off, excuse me, which he's already talked to Javier the caretaker, and now he has entered the barn, and that's where we are. The smell, which was eye-watering everywhere else on the property, rolled out of the barn door like a full-scale chemical weapons attack, so that for a moment I couldn't even go inside, but had to stand there and try to fan a hole in it with my hand. It didn't work. It never did. But at last I was able to deal with it enough to walk inside. Most of the barn was taken up with a central pen about 20 by 30 feet or so, with a chest-high rail and a bottom about a foot or so deep in stinking mud. And I mean stinking. At one end of the enclosure, dim and pale in the flickering overhead light, crouched a huge, naked, bald man, smeared with mud and worse. He looked up at me, and his squinting eyes gleamed. "Hello, George," I said. Nobody called him Fatback to his face. It wasn't polite. Not that he understood me at the moment anyway. He let out a squeal of rage at the sound of my voice and hurtled across the pen on his hands and knees, splashing mud and shit and pig slops everywhere. But he slipped and skidded headfirst into the barrier with a grunt of pain and frustration. He sank back in the muck and sat looking at me sullenly, blood now trickling from a cut on his forehead. I sighed and checked my watch. 11:52. Still 8 minutes to go. I moved safely out of splashing range and watched him as the time ticked away. He watched me back. It was unpleasant being stared at by those narrow eyes. There wasn't anything human in them as far as I could see, but there was an awful lot of murderous anger. I was glad old Javier seemed to keep the pen in good repair. Casa de Maldición is Spanish for House of the Curse, But what had happened to George was worse than that. The child of an old Californio family, the Spanish-speaking folks who owned everything before the gringos showed up, George Noseda had inherited not just a lot of family property in the Pulgas Ridge area, but the family's major obligation as well, which happened to be a debt to the Dark Powers. Nowadays, we call them by more respectable names, like the Opposition, but it's still the same old firm. In return for unnatural prosperity for the family, for several hundred years, every oldest male child of the Noseda line had been werehogs, doomed each night to become a ravening beast between the hours of midnight and sunup. All through the 19th and 20th centuries, the family did their best to keep the suffering male heir locked up at night. Mistakes were made, and more than a few local monster legends had been started because of those mistakes. But by and large, the family had come to accept the price of the bargain some ancestor had made in return for their good fortune in all other matters. Then along came George. A creature of the late 20th century, he had never doubted in the power of dark magic. After all, he had started to smell powerfully of chitterlings when most boys were just growing their first scraggly mustaches, and had changed for the first time soon thereafter. But, like most of the people of this modern age, he didn't think he should have to take the fall for something his great-great-great-grandparents had done. So he made a deal with the opposition. He would sacrifice most of the family fortune, land, wealth, and prestige, and in return, Hell's minions promised they would reverse the curse. Poor George. Like so many others before him, he underestimated what he was dealing with. He got what he wanted to the letter of his new contract, and the curse was, in fact, reversed. So from then on, each night at 12, the same thing happened. In fact, it was happening now. The fat, naked man suddenly fell face down into the filthy mud, bellowing like he was on fire. He began to thrash, sending gouts of stinking slime everywhere. I stepped back to the front door to protect my coat, which wasn't all that expensive, but was a favorite. The noise went on as the huddled figure in the muddy pen writhed and changed, grew darker and misshapen, until it had taken on an entirely new form, that of an immense black, bristle-skinned boar hog. The hog finally stopped squealing. It rolled over and sat up on its haunches, then turned its beady eyes in my direction. "That hurts like an unholy bitch," he said, "every time." "Nice to see you, George." He wrinkled his snout. "Oh, I'm sure, Bobby. A treat for all ages." He saw something floating in the muck before him and sucked it up, then began to chew. "Corn cob," he explained when he saw my horrified look. "Fiber. And oh, my sweet and precious God, do I need it." I was getting more information than I wanted, and it would only get worse. George was garrulous in this form, pig's body, man's mind, and usually had no one to talk to but Javier, or one of the old man's sons, the only other people who still lived on this shrunken remnant of what had once been a grand seigneurial property. Of course, when he was in his other form, his dawn to midnight form of a pig's mind in a man's body, he wasn't much for conversation. They reversed the curse, you see, just like they promised. Who do you think invented lawyers in the first place? "So what brings you up to my neck of the woods, Mr. D?" George asked. "What can I do for you?" "I need information on a citizen named Edward Lyons Walker, and also on Grasswax, infernal prosecutor." Fatback was the only outsider I could safely approach in the current climate. The opposition had hosed him in a completely legitimate way, but George had never forgiven them, and he made it his life's work to keep a close eye on their dealings. That was why a large portion of what remained of his family's once vast fortune went toward funding a small research agency, of which George was the only client. The only other thing in the room beside George's pen was the projection monitor screen he used to view what they sent him, and to troll the net for what he could find himself. All voice-controlled, of course. He's a pig. Sure, I'll see what I can find for you, Mr. D. He cleared his throat and said, Radiant. At the code word, the screen flicked on, bathing the room in cool light. Hey, do you want to do me a favor while I'm starting the search? Get that rake and scratch my back. I did what he asked, holding my breath. George isn't a bad guy, and it's not his fault he smells like death's diaper. Híjole, he said as the latest gleaning scrolled past. This grass wax thing is some crazy shit. Does it have anything to do with the Walker death? I doubt it. I didn't want to tell him anything he didn't need to know. Not because I didn't trust him. His hatred of the opposition was genuine. But because I didn't know exactly what I was dealing with. I don't know, maybe. Well, there's a ton of stuff about both of them flying around. It'll take me a while to pull it all together and make sense of it. How do you want it? Electronic or hard copy? Electronic. And use my private email address, will you? I didn't want it going through Alice, who didn't even know what the word private meant. Oh, and there's one other thing. I need to get in touch with someone from the opposition. Fatback turned sour, little piggy eyes on me. Forget it. I'm not doing that for you or anyone else, Mr. D. We've always got along well, you and I, but if you want a go-between, find someone else. I'm not asking you to set up a meeting, George, just to tell me where I can find a particular member of the other side. I'll do the rest. Now that I was about to say it, the whole thing seemed ludicrous, suicidal even, but I plunged ahead anyway. I need to track down a fixer called Countess, a big shot. I don't know the rest of her name. I gave him a quick description of her appearance, at least the time I'd seen her, and told him what little I knew, including that she'd been brought in to clean up after the Walker mess. So you are tangled up in the grass wax thing, George said cheerfully. Well, any dead devil is a reason to celebrate as far as I'm concerned. Go tell Javier I'm hungry, and I'll see what I can find out about her. Javier was putting the remains of his own dinner into the kitchen garbage can. When I told him what his boss wanted, he lifted out the liner bag and trundled the whole mess out to the pig barn. I decided I didn't need to watch Fastback getting fed, so I stayed in the kitchen, listening idly to Spanish chatter on the television for a while. Then, when that got boring, I stepped out onto the back porch and was serenaded by the other pigs, snorting sleepily in their own barn a short distance down the slope. Javier finally came back. You ready for you now, Mr. Dollar? I think I've got what you need, George told me when I approached his pen. He was looking up at the screen on the wall and a whole column of addresses, his ears twitching. I can't find an address or any hint of home turf for her. The bad guys move around more than you guys do, but I've got something that might work just as well. Try a place called the Waterhole on the Camino Real by the university's north gates. Really? The Waterhole? I knew of the place, and to be honest, it seemed a little lightweight for a heavy hitter like the Countess. Yeah, really. At least if it's the Countess of Cold Hands you're talking about. He showed me a blurry image that looked like it had been shot from concealment without a sufficient lens. But even so, it was impossible to mistake that small, pale, extremely alluring form. Yeah, that's her. But the Waterhole. I thought it was a student place. Whatever. It's the only spot I've managed to find a sighting of her that you also might have a chance of getting out of. Don't you mean into? Oh, I doubt you'll have any problems getting in, Bobby. His snout curled in that sour little smile again. Cute. That's me. I'll send you the rest of the stuff when it's ready. Thanks, George. Don't forget to bill me. No worries there. He grunted and settled down into the mud. On your way out, will you ask Javier to bring me Meredith? I'm feeling the need of a little company. Meredith? I didn't get it. Who's Meredith? A very, very nice young lady. Of the four-footed variety. I was glad to hear he'd finally found someone. A werehog, like you? He was silent for a moment, but then he laughed. There are few things odder than hearing a pig laugh in the middle of the night. No, no, just an ordinary American landrace sow, but she has a sweet disposition, a certain tenderness, and a lovely shape. His look became stern. Don't judge me, sir. Don't you dare judge me. Not judging, I thanked him and made my way quickly back to my car. I had my windows open all the way down Alpine, but didn't get rid of the smell until I reached the bottom of the hills. Chapter 6. Waking Up in Trouble. It was still dark outside when my bladder woke me. That's pretty much how it works. Use a body, become a slave to various unpleasant internal systems. By the way, there are no bathrooms in heaven, although angels eat and drink there after a fashion, which, now that I think of it, is pretty weird. Generally, my earthly bodies are in reasonable working order, 30-ish in appearance, but a good bit stronger and more durable than your average human of that age. So the fact that I was trying to find my way to the John in the dark meant one of two things. Either my kidneys were failing, or I'd had far too much to drink the previous night. The way my head felt suggested that it was the latter. The suspicion was strengthened when I couldn't recognize the bathroom floor under my bare feet. My apartment had cheap tiles, but this was carpeted. Misadventure was confirmed when I got back and realized someone else was in the bed. You done crashing around like a fucking rhinoceros? Asked Monica, mush-mouthed with sleep. Shut up already. I wanted to ask her what I was doing at her place, but I was beginning to remember just enough to guess. I'd got back to the Compasses about half an hour before closing time and had done my best to drink away the smell of pig shit and the memory of Fatback's eyes, both the sad ones in his pig face and the mindless, nasty ones in his human face. At some point, Monica had been sitting in a booth drinking with me, and we had been breathing tipsily in each other's faces as we talked. QED. That was as much thinking as I could do, with a head that felt like a used sweat sock stuffed with wet cement. I crawled in beside Monica, spent a minute getting used to the unfamiliar feeling of a bed with relatively clean sheets, then tumbled back into sleep. Wake up, laughing boy. Monica was standing at the bedroom window, sipping from a glass of water and looking through the slats of the blinds. She was pretty much naked. I could see just enough of Cedar Street outside to know it was morning, the gray kind, the stay-in-bed kind. But it was more interesting looking at Monica. If only she wasn't so damn cute, I thought. Cute is one of my many, many weaknesses. The refrigerator's empty and the only coffee's instant, Bee. She turned to survey me. I think you're going to buy me breakfast. Wasn't much I could say to that, except, yes, ma'am. Besides, I really needed the coffee. I swear, you don't understand what slaves humans are to these meat sacks until you've spent some time not wearing one. And, like I said, it was nice to look at Monica standing there, her graceful long back and wide hips. She wasn't skinny like the woman on Friends, and her curves always looked good on her. Of course, the fact that she was showing me all this after the way our previous relationship had ended meant I needed to be careful. A drunken slip was one thing, but I was very far away from wanting to start all over with her. Your phone's been ringing and ringing for over an hour, she said. Anything going on? Research coming in from Fatback, I guessed, but something about her interest didn't feel entirely natural. I wondered if that was jealousy making its way back into the Bobby and Monica equation or something else. Paranoia on my part? Or was I being too hard on myself when a certain amount of paranoia was sensible? After all, it had been a pretty interesting week. Nothing too interesting, I said, as casually as I could, then groaned as I sat up and began hunting around on the floor for some pants. My skull hurts. Hell, even my hair hurts. How much did we drink? She looked at me over one shoulder as she pulled on a clingy sweater. She didn't seem as badly off as I was. In fact, she seemed to be enjoying herself. Enough to make Chico cry. Where do you want to go? That pancake place still open? She said it lightly, but my alarms went off. Monica and I used to go to the pancake place on Sunday mornings in the midst of our most domestic phase, when one of us was sleeping at the other one's place most nights of the week. Nah, this time of the day we'd have to wait half an hour for a table. Let's go to Oyster Bill's. Oyster Bill's? Their French toast tastes like cardboard. She frowned. You're not freaking out on me already, are you, Dollar? One drunken screw and you're getting ready to run for the hills again? I just wanted some decent pancakes. No, that's fine, I said, although not entirely truthfully. But at Bill's, they serve alcohol in the morning, and there's a pay and save on the way there. At that moment, I needed a handful of aspirin, and then a Bloody Mary, more than anyone who hasn't recently seen the flensed and unpleasantly disarticulated corpse of one of hell's prosecutors could possibly understand. We stretched out our breakfast till close to noon. Several hairs of the dog that bit me stabilized my head, and we mostly just read the papers, but the whole thing was beginning to feel kind of creepily comfortable. See, I actually like Monica a lot, but, well, nothing more than that. She always seemed to see things in our relationship that were invisible to me. Also, the mathematics of our time together seemed to work out that for every week we had fun together, we spent a week later on making each other miserable. I really didn't want to set myself up for that kind of karmic payback. Things were complicated enough. So what's going on with you, Bobby? She asked at one point. You hardly talked at all last night. Is that why you brought me home? To talk? She scowled, half in jest. Don't be that way. It was nice, and you thought so too. I'm just worried about you. You seemed, I don't know, kind of freaky. About grass wax and that Walker guy and everything. The last thing I wanted to do was talk about any of that. At best, it meant she was feeling protective of me again, and at worst, well, I didn't know what that might mean, but it bothered me that she was so interested in my recent work history. Paranoia can be caution by another name, especially when you live in the world of the unlikely full-time the way I do. Feeling this twitch of old habits returning was actually beginning to worry me a bit. I didn't want to become that guy again. It's just the same old shit with some new twists, I told her as I called for the check. I got a book. I got some stuff to do. Take your time. Finish your coffee. You're going? She gave me a wistful smile. Okay. It was fun. Like old times. Definitely. I didn't know what else to do, so I bent and kissed her, on the mouth, but promising nothing. I'll probably see you tonight. At the Compasses, I mean. Oh, yeah, she said. At the Compasses. I could feel her watching my back as I went out. On a hunch, I waited half a minute, then doubled back past the front window at a different angle. She had her phone out and was talking, her face serious. Didn't prove anything, of course, but it didn't make me feel any better either. And now I was definitely starting to feel like that guy again, the trust nobody guy. It's not a nice way to feel, which is one reason I gave it up. It was a warm day for so early in the year, and the waterfront was covered with downtown workers brown bagging or just enjoying the bay breezes and watching the boats. With the return of brain cell function, I remembered that I'd promised Sam I'd take the kid off his hands the next day, which meant that, advocate work permitting, this afternoon was going to be my only chance to do some reconnaissance. I wanted to head over toward the university to check out the water hole and the surrounding neighborhood before the evening. I also wanted a little time on my own to think. Some people can manage that while they're making slightly awkward conversation with an ex-lover with whom they might or might not have just started up again. I'm not one of those people. Even if you don't know San Judas all that well, you may know something about Stanford University, the Harvard of the West, alma mater of several U.S. presidents, and, although they don't talk about this quite as much, nursery of uncounted numbers of extremely unpleasant tactical weapons, including the hydrogen bomb. Back in the middle of the 19th century, there was only one real city in Northern California, San Francisco, which started its boom with the gold rush and never looked back, selling prospectors gear to all those suckers on their way to the gold fields, then taking more money from them when they came back in exchange for all manner of services, a few of them actually legal. Across the mouth of San Francisco Bay, Oakland became the jumping-off point for those on their way to the Golden Hills. Two other large towns also began to grow beside the bay, one centered around Mission San Jose at the bay's southeastern end, and the other around a secondary mission named San Judas Tadeo, beside what later became the Redwood River. See, contrary to what a lot of idiots thought then and still do, the name San Judas has nothing to do with Judas Iscariot, betrayer of Jesus, although later on it came to fit amusingly with the growing image of the place. The city is named for St. Jude, patron saint of the hopeless, the unloved, and other lost causes. In other words, an even better fit than being named after Christ's ex-pal. As more and more people began to need wood for boats and houses, sawmills sprung up all over the hills west of San Judas, and settlers dredged the Redwood River so the logs could be brought by water to the new harbor there. Then, just when the town was really starting to grow, somebody found oil up in the Santa Cruz Range, and a lot of it got shipped out down the river to San Judas and its new harbor. The boom only lasted about a decade or so, but that was enough to leave Mission San Jose and any other pretenders to the title of the Bay Area's second city in the dust. And that's kind of been the nature of San Judas ever since. Boom and bust. Feast, then famine. It's been an oil town, a port town, and eventually a factory town because of all the defense industries that set up here around the time of the Second World War. And a main lure for that kind of technology were all those science and engineering graduates from Stanford and the other local universities, which is why Jude, along with Berkeley and San Francisco itself, wound up at the center of the information revolution. Leland Stanford was a Victorian-era entrepreneur, a robber baron to many, who became the governor of California. When his only child died of typhoid, he and Mrs. Stanford built the university in their son's honor, and for the first few years it was a remarkably forward-looking institution. Then Stanford's wife died in a fire, with the ex-governor himself unable to save her because of a locked door. The governor heard her last terrible moments and was never the same man after that, nor was his university the same kind of open and open-hearted place it had been. No more modern sandstone buildings, no more sweeping vistas to the beautiful western hills. Instead, the university grew upward as much as out, spiking the skyline with dark Gothic towers. The governor's gift to the state also grew more inward as well, surrounding itself with turreted walls that made it look more like the castle of an occupying army than a modern seat of learning. Once the Camino Real, the great north-south highway that stretches from San Francisco all the way down to the far end of the bay, ran right through the university itself, but sometime in the 1920s, the Stanford Board of Regents decided they didn't like the hoi polloi motoring freely through their expensive and exclusive university, so they lowered the road and turned it into a long tunnel that passes under the narrowest part of the university property. If you decline to use the tunnel, your choice is either line up to be examined for admittance at one of the two forbidding university gates, or just turn the hell around and go back. Perhaps because the deadly fire that killed Mrs. Stanford was rumored to have been started by a drunken servant, or perhaps because he was just a mean old bugger, Governor Stanford was also very, very down on alcohol. Not a drop to be had on campus, and for years not a drop to be had anywhere near the campus. That's eased over the decades. Although the university itself is still famously dry, a number of drinking establishments sprang up in the shadow of the walls to serve Stanford students. Preparing to rule the world can be thirsty work, I'm told. The Water Hole was one of these student hangouts, nestled between the Camino Real and the university turnoff, only yards away from the huge and forbidding Branner Gate, a monstrosity of black granite whose polished sheen made it look perpetually wet. At least I had always thought of the Water Hole as a student hangout, which was one of the reasons I'd never been inside. I once had a client who got run over in the parking lot by a drunken university professor. Helping him off to heaven afterward was the closest to the property I'd ever been. If Fatback's information was correct, though, there was a bit more to the place than that. In fact, if one of hell's big hitters hung out here, that automatically made it pretty damn dangerous, and the last place someone in my position should be. But here I was casing the joint like a private dick, setting up a motel sting for an unhappy spouse. I was doing it because a lot of things still didn't make any sense with this whole Walker Grasswax affair. For one thing, I wondered why my own team had so quickly and casually offered me up to the opposition for questioning. Didn't make me feel very protected, if you know what I mean, which was why I wanted a different perspective on the matter. The fact that the perspective in question belonged to a devastatingly attractive woman creature was simply how things had worked out. That was what I was doing my best to believe anyway, but I had to admit that despite our only momentary acquaintance, I had trouble keeping the glamorous countess out of my thoughts. Because she's made that way, I reminded myself, on purpose, just like the wiggly little fake worm growing on one of those toothy deep-water fish. I'd seen the outside of the bar a zillion times, with its famously broken sign reading "The Wait Hole." The rest of the place was about what you'd expect of a mid-century student dive, a long, low wooden building with tiny windows that had been almost completely plastered over with old band flyers and happy hour 2 for the price of 1 ads. My first surprise when I stepped through the scratched and many times repainted door was how big the place really was. The main room stretched back into what I had thought must be the building behind it, and though the ceiling was low and the lights were lower, it was possible to see that it was pretty crowded, especially for a weekday afternoon. It was an odd setup for a college bar, that was clear right away. In some ways, the Water Hole looked more like a nightclub, including a scarred dance floor and a small stage at one end of the room, but it was the patrons who really confused me. Usually student joints are low on ambiance and even lower on mystery, but big on picnic tables and pitchers of cheap beer. The Water Hole had more the feel of your sleazy lounge rendezvous, the kind of place where businessmen in town for the weekend went looking for drunk and lonely hausfraus. Not that there weren't any students in the place, but they weren't acting very studenty, if you know what I mean. Instead of the groups of 3 or 4 or more I would have expected, the patrons were mostly huddled in pairs, but plenty of drinkers, both at the bar and in the dark, narrow booths, were obviously on their own and drinking pretty seriously as well. The unsocial kind of drinking that I'd done a few times myself and which left no cheerful memories. To be honest, I couldn't quite get a handle on anything about the place, and that was beginning to bug me. I contemplated ordering a beer from the sour, tattooed, and shaven-headed bartender, then checking out the exits and the restrooms in a conscientious manner so I'd know the layout when I came back in the evening. But for some reason, I didn't relish the idea of becoming one of those solitary afternoon drinkers, even in the service of proper reconnaissance. Instead, I turned around and slipped back out to the parking lot. I still hadn't received any work calls, and I didn't want to have to deal with the questions that seeing Monica would raise, so I decided to avoid the compasses. I stopped instead at my other place of business, the second-floor office on Arch Street that we local advocates share, a place we use to prop up our real-world identities as insurance adjusters, reporters, or whatever other guises help us to snoop around effectively as we perform our angelic chores. The only person who works there is our secretary, the angelic functionary named Alice. Like me, most of the rest of the advocates look like they're in their 20s or 30s. I'm not sure how Alice pulled duty that had her looking like she was 55 and lived on fast food, unless she really did live on fast food and had done this to herself, but it didn't seem like she could be very happy about it. And in fact, she never gave any indication that she was happy. "Hi, Alice," I said. "Anything happening I should know about?" She barely looked up from her computer. "Other than you screwing the pooch with that Walker thing?" "Thanks. Nice to see you too. You're the one who sent me that, right?" She raised a penciled-on eyebrow. "Do you see anyone else here? Your big stupid buddy was offline, so I gave it to you. Then you messed it up all on your own." All of which I already knew. "You're a treasure, Alice. Sam said he lost connection. Is that usual? Was there anything else strange about the call?" "It happens occasionally. It's because of the weather outside. Well, it's not weather exactly." She shook her head, opened a drawer, and took out a bag of M&Ms. She poured herself a generous handful and put the bag away without offering me any. "As far as the call, Mr. Detective Guy, full of questions," she said, through a clicking mouthful, "it came right down from Central Dispatch, same as usual." I left Alice typing and crunching and headed back to my place, planning to settle in with a cup of coffee and the files Fatback had sent me. It was late afternoon, and Stambaugh Street was bustling with people on their way home. Every tenant in my building seemed to have entered the lobby at the same time, so I waited for another elevator instead of crushing myself into the first with everyone else. As I walked down the fourth-floor hallway, I noticed something strange, a sour, slightly alarming odor that made my eyes and nostrils itch. Before I figured it out by scent alone, I reached my door and saw the source. A handprint, roughly the size of a car's steering wheel, had been scorched into the door. The wood blackened and charred, and the paint bubbled around it. A handprint distorted by what looked like trailing scars made by long claws. My heart bumped and stuttered in my chest, just like a real terrified living person's heart, and my skin went icy cold with shock. I darted a look around, but I was alone in the corridor. The burning hand. Somebody had marked my own personal door with the burning hand, hell's way of letting you know you were living on borrowed time. I'd been taught that the only people who received this sign of infernal displeasure were poor doomed fools who tried to cheat the devil himself. Apparently, someone thought yours truly was just that kind of fool. Chapter 7. A Lioness Comes to Drink. The inside of my apartment was as hot as an oven, sticky hot, and pretty much a continuation of the obvious message left on the front door. Furniture was upside down, small stuff had been smashed, drawers had been pulled out and dumped, and what few papers and books I had were strewn all across the floor. Even my CDs, no, I haven't gone all MP3 yet, had been dragged out, opened, and scattered. I looked down at the faces on the floor, Monk, Buddy Guy, Cannonball Adderley, staring up at me like a frozen crowd scene. What had the visitors been looking for? And yes, of course, it occurred to me that this had to be connected to the current mess of the missing soul and the dead prosecutor, but the fact that somebody was upset enough about it to trash my place and leave a burning symbol of their discontent on my front door didn't get me any nearer to understanding the why of it. The who wasn't real clear either, although from the blackened Kong-size print, those guys with the pitchforks were leading contenders. One good thing, whoever had been there wasn't smart enough to find my gun safe, and since I'm not going to explain where it's hidden, you won't find it either if you happen by someday. I don't need a gun in my daily job, and I don't usually carry, but things had just changed drastically. So I grabbed my Smith & Wesson. I grabbed my Smith & Wesson revolver, a couple of speed loaders, and a few extra boxes of hollow points. Then I called Alice over at the office. "Tell headquarters I'm going to move out for a few days," I said. "It's cheaper just to give in and wash the dishes," she said. "Ha ha. Somebody tossed my place. Just tell them." I heard her making a note, or at least banging on her keyboard. "Where are you going to be, Dollar? I'll let them know when I've decided." "They won't like that." She almost sounded human. I wondered what her history might have been. "They don't like to guess, and it doesn't seem like a good time to make the bosses nervous." "Yeah, but I don't know where I'm going yet." "You want me to give you the safe house information? I thought you knew them all by heart." Email them. I'll pick a nice one, get cozy, and think of you." I hung up before she told me to get bent or something and ruined the illusion that just for a minute she actually cared whether I did or didn't exist. Alice was right. The mule and his supervisors were not going to like me moving out without leaving them a forwarding address. But it wasn't like they couldn't get in touch with me if they wanted. I wasn't going to one of their safe houses. Just for the moment, I wanted to be the only person who knew where Bobby Dollar might lay his weary head. The burning hand thing had shaken me pretty good. As I sat, waiting in the waterhole, I nursed a beer and tried to figure out what had made someone so mad at me personally. It almost had to be about the whole Walker thing. Even if the late Grasswax had been venal enough to want to take a shot at the folks who had witnessed his humiliation, as he'd put it, with the Martino case the day before, Sam, and especially young Clarence, would surely have been on his list ahead of me. But if it was the Walker thing, what had I done other than be on the scene when the soul in question failed to show? And what had I done after that except answer official questions from my superiors and Hell's Chancellor, then request some information from Fatback? Had my visit to the Pigman triggered some kind of information search alarm? If so, that didn't narrow things down much, because I'd asked him for information about lots of different stuff, including the lovely hellspawn I was hoping to meet here tonight. Suddenly feeling a touch vulnerable, I slid along the bench until my back and left side were against the corner of the booth.